When I came back from the hospital, my house was gone. Not just the furniture or the photos, the entire house. The porch my husband built with his bare hands, the lemon tree we planted on our first anniversary, the chipped mug I used every morning for 40 years. All of it vanished, sold to a stranger while I was lying half alive, counting ceiling tiles and praying for mercy. They say betrayal hurts most when it comes with your bloodline. I used to think that was just something old folks said to scare you straight. Now I know it's scripture. Before we continue, tell me where you're listening from, and if you've ever trusted someone so deeply you never imagined they could sell your whole life out from under you. Make sure you subscribe for more stories from Grandma Evelyn. Because, child, this one still burns. They call me Grandma Evelyn, but once upon a time, I was just Evelyn May Carter, a teacher with steady hands and a habit of drinking my coffee before the sun rose. My husband, Charles, used to joke that I loved that house more than I loved him. Maybe he was right. We built it in the summer of 1979, two young fools with nothing but a handful of savings and a dream bigger than our credit score. The walls smelled of cedar and hope. Charles passed 10 years ago. He left quietly, sitting in his armchair beneath the window that faced the lemon tree. After the funeral, I promised myself I would keep the house alive, keep his memory breathing through each brick. Every scratch on the door, every photo frame crooked on the wall, it was our story written in dust. My daughter Marcia never saw it that way. She grew up under that roof, but she saw it as something to escape, not something sacred. When she was a girl, she used to say, "Mama, this house smells old. One day I'll live somewhere that smells like new paint and money." I'd just smile, thinking she'd grow out of that hunger. Marcia was bright, too bright sometimes, always had ideas bigger than patience. She went to Atlanta, studied business, and started dressing like her life depended on being seen. When Charles died, she came home for the funeral, walked through the house with her phone out, filming everything. She said she wanted memories. I didn't know she also wanted a price tag. I remember that Sunday afternoon, warm light, gospel humming on the radio, a pitcher of lemonade sweating on the table. Marcia asked if she could handle my bills, just to make things easier. I should have known better, but I was tired, my hands trembled more each day, and the world was turning faster than my knees could keep up. After my stroke last winter, she was the one who signed me into the hospital. "Don't you worry, Mama," she said, brushing my hair back like when she was 10. "I'll take care of everything." Her voice was syrup, sweet, heavy, and too smooth to trust. When you're lying in a hospital bed, time doesn't move. The ceiling becomes your calendar. The sound of footsteps in the hallway becomes your heartbeat. Every visitor is a lifeline. Marcia came twice that first week, smiling like everything was under control. Then she stopped showing up. The nurses told me she called, said she was handling paperwork. I believed her. I wanted to. There was a photo I kept on the nightstand, Charles holding baby Marcia in front of the house. I'd trace their faces with my finger every night, whispering prayers into that frame. I never imagined while I was praying, she was turning that same house into cash. Mrs. Tanner, my neighbor, visited one morning near the end of my stay. She brought me a slice of peach pie wrapped in foil. I remember her face, kind but tight, like she was holding in something sour. "Evelyn," she said softly, "did you sell your place?" I laughed. "Sell it? Lord, no! Charles would rise from the grave and scold me." She didn't laugh back. She just looked at the pie, then at me. "I saw a moving truck out front last week, some man unloading boxes." My heart stuttered, but my body was too weak to stand. Must be a mistake, I told her. She nodded, but her eyes said otherwise. That night, I couldn't sleep. The lemon tree kept appearing in my dreams, branches shaking, roots torn out of the soil. When I woke, the pillow was wet with tears I didn't remember crying. You know, they tell you hospitals are where people heal, but sometimes it's where your life gets sold piece by piece while you're too doped up on morphine to notice. I didn't know it then, but by the time I stepped out of that sterile white room and breathed the open air again, I no longer owned my own front door. The morning they discharged me, the nurse wheeled me to the hospital entrance with a smile that felt borrowed. The world outside looked sharper than I remembered. The sky too blue, the sunlight too honest. Mrs. Tanner picked me up in her old Buick. She didn't say much, just kept glancing my way as if afraid I might shatter mid-ride. When we turned onto Magnolia Lane, my chest tightened. I could see the lemon tree from down the road, smaller somehow, like it had been holding its breath. The mailbox still leaned to the right, the way Charles left it after one of his "I'll fix it tomorrow" promises. Everything looked the same, until it didn't. There was a strange car parked in my driveway, a sleek silver sedan, too polished for this neighborhood, and boxes, dozens of them, stacked by the porch like a new chapter someone forgot to warn me about. Mrs. Tanner slowed to a stop. "Maybe they're just delivering something," she said, though we both knew better. I stepped out of the car, my cane sinking slightly into the soil. The front door was open. Inside, I heard laughter, a man's voice, then a child's. For a second, I thought maybe Marcia had rented the place out temporarily, but my stomach said no. I walked in. The air smelled different. Lemon cleaner, not lemon tree. The furniture was rearranged, my curtains replaced with something sterile and white. And on the mantel, where Charles' photo used to be, stood a plastic dinosaur and a scented candle. A boy, maybe 10 years old, appeared from the hallway. He froze, holding a toy truck. "Dad," he shouted. A man came out of the kitchen, tall, with salt and pepper hair, and that startled look people get when they realize the world just broke its rules. "Ma'am, can I help you?" he asked, polite but guarded. I leaned heavier on my cane. "You can start by telling me what you're doing in my house." He blinked. "Your house?" Before I could answer, tires crunched on the gravel outside. Marcia's voice floated in from the doorway, bright and rehearsed. "Mama, you're home!" The man stepped back as she entered. She looked immaculate, like betrayal came with a wardrobe. "I was going to tell you," she began. "Tell me what?" I asked, the words trembling but sharp. "That I sold the house. You were in the hospital and the bills—" I cut her off. "What bills, Marcia? Medicare covered everything. Pastor Riley's congregation raised the rest." She hesitated, her painted smile twitching. "Mama, you don't understand. It was too much for you to handle. I had to make decisions, fast ones. You could have died, and then where would the house go? Probate court? Taxes? This way, it's handled." I stared at her, the air between us heavy with things unsaid. "You sold your father's house while I was still breathing in a hospital bed." Her voice hardened. "Don't make this dramatic. You'll have enough money to live comfortably. I transferred part of it into your account." I laughed, a dry, broken sound that startled even me. "You think this is about money? That porch, that lemon tree, your daddy's chair. You sold memories, child. You sold roots." She looked away. "It's just a house, Mama." Just a house. The phrase hit me harder than the stroke ever did. The man, later I'd learn his name was David Brown, cleared his throat awkwardly. I had no idea, ma'am. The paperwork was clean, notarized. I bought it fair. I nodded slowly. I don't blame you, son. You were dealing with a stranger, not family. Marcia folded her arms. Please, let's not cause a scene in front of his kid. I looked at her, at the girl I once rocked to sleep. Sweetheart, the scene was caused the minute you put a price tag on our name. Her jaw clenched. I did what I had to. I turned, my legs unsteady, and walked outside. The lemon tree was still there, its leaves trembling in the wind like it knew something sacred had been broken. Mrs. Tanner stood by the car, eyes wide. Evelyn, you all right? I'm standing, I said. That's all that matters today. Marcia followed me out. Mama, please don't make this harder. I stopped at the gate, looked back at the house, or rather what was left of the idea of it. You made it hard the day you forgot who built that porch. David stepped onto the porch then, hat in hand, his boy peeking from behind him. Mrs. Carter, if I'd known. You didn't, I said softly, and now you do. The ride back to Mrs. Tanner's was quiet. The world blurred past, all green and gold, but I couldn't feel any of it. My hands kept tracing the ridges of my cane, like maybe if I held on tight enough, I wouldn't drift away completely. When we passed the old church, I saw the steeple's shadow stretch across the road, long, thin, and cracked. It reminded me of how faith feels after betrayal, still reaching upward, but split down the middle. That night, I slept in Mrs. Tanner's guest room, surrounded by the smell of mothballs and fading lilac perfume. I dreamt of Charles again, standing by the lemon tree. He didn't say a word, just looked at me with that quiet, knowing smile, like he'd been expecting this all along. When I woke, the pillow was damp. The dawn light fell across the room, touching everything except me. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be homeless while still having a pulse. Mrs. Tanner's house smelt like lavender and furniture polish, the kind of scent that tried too hard to hide loneliness. She led me to the guest room and apologized for the thin mattress, for the noise of the water heater, for things that didn't matter. I told her I've slept worse, sugar, but when the door closed and her footsteps faded down the hall, that small, borrowed room felt like a waiting room for the rest of my life. On the dresser sat a glass angel, its wings chipped. I stared at it until the sun slipped away, wondering if angels ever get tired of watching people make the same mistakes. That first night, I didn't cry. Tears would have meant there was still something soft left in me, but I was scraped clean. My home, my memories, even my dignity, all boxed up, sold, and driven away. When Charles died, I lost a man. When Marcia sold that house, I lost my bloodline. The next morning, Mrs. Tanner brought me breakfast, buttered toast, scrambled eggs, and a cup of coffee that wasn't strong enough to wake a memory. You should talk to her, she said gently. Sometimes folks do foolish things out of panic. I smiled, the kind of smile you use when the world keeps giving you advice instead of mercy. Panic doesn't forge signatures, I said. I spent my days sitting on her porch, cane propped against the chair, watching cars pass by like time itself was taunting me. Every creak of her swing reminded me of mine, the one Charles built the summer we retired. He painted it blue because he said, "Blue's the color of peace." I didn't feel peaceful now. 3 days later, I decided to walk by my old street. It took me nearly an hour. My legs aren't what they used to be. But when I reached Magnolia Lane, the air hit different. New curtains in the windows, fresh paint on the mailbox. My mailbox. I stood across the street, half hidden behind a magnolia tree. A woman, maybe David's sister, was hanging laundry on the line. I could hear a child laughing inside, the same laughter I'd heard that first day. My chest tightened, not from anger, but from grief, the kind of grief that doesn't scream, it hums quietly under your ribs. Evelyn? I turned. David Brown stood a few feet away, holding a grocery bag. His expression was part guilt, part pity, a mix I'd seen before at funerals. "I didn't expect to see you," he said softly. "I didn't expect to be here," I replied. He nodded toward the house. "It's beautiful, isn't it? You can tell it's loved." I almost laughed. It was loved long before you walked through that door. He lowered his eyes. "I didn't mean disrespect. Look, I asked your daughter if everything was legal. She said you were too ill to handle property matters." "She wasn't lying about the illness," I said, voice steady. "Just everything else." David sighed. "If I'd known." "But you didn't," I cut in, "and that's not your sin to carry." For a moment, we just stood there. Then he said, "If you'd like to come in sometime to see it, I'd understand." I shook my head. That house doesn't know me anymore. I turned to leave, but he said something that made me pause. "It misses you." The words hung in the air like a note from a song I hadn't heard in years. I didn't look back. I couldn't. That night, I sat at Mrs. Tanner's kitchen table with a stack of old letters spread before me, letters Charles wrote during our first year of marriage. His handwriting was messy, loops and slants like music without rhythm. One line caught my eye. "Evelyn, home isn't the walls we build, it's the promises we keep inside them." I read it 3 times, each word heavier than the last. The next day, I went through the few boxes I had left from the hospital: clothes, a Bible, and my old documents folder. Inside was the copy of my will, dated before my stroke. As I flipped through the pages, something else fell out. A carbon copy of my signature from the mortgage papers Charles and I signed years ago. That's when it hit me. The signature on the sale papers, the one I'd glimpsed on the buyer's contract Marcia had waved at me, had looked wrong. The loops were too round, the letters too smooth. Charles always teased me about my teacher's signature, stern and sharp. Marcia must have forged it. My own daughter. The next morning, I called the county records office. The clerk was polite but brisk, the way people are when they're trained to sound helpful without getting involved. "Yes, Mrs. Carter," she said after a pause. "We do have the property transfer here. Seller, Evelyn May Carter. Buyer, David Brown. Notarized by—" She stopped. "Oh, that's interesting." "What is?" I asked. "The notary's name, Marcia Carter." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Can you send me a certified copy?" "Of course. It'll take a few days." I thanked her and hung up. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was legal, carved into paper and ink. Mrs. Tanner found me at the table an hour later, staring at nothing. "You all right, honey?" "I will be," I said quietly. "I just need time to remember who I am without that house." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "And who's that?" I met her eyes. A woman who's been poor before, a woman who knows how to rebuild. Still, when the mail came 3 days later and I unfolded that certified copy, my heart cracked all over again. Seeing my name forged, my trust turned into evidence, it was like being buried twice. That night, I walked outside. The moon hung low, fat and yellow, like it was eavesdropping. I whispered into the dark, "Charles, if you can hear me, I need a little of that old Carter strength right about now." The wind answered first, rustling the leaves of Mrs. Tanner's garden. And then, maybe it was the wind again, Maybe something else. I could swear I smelled lemons. The morning I decided to fight back, the sky was the color of old pewter, heavy, tired, the kind of sky that made you whisper your prayers instead of shout them. I sat at Mrs. Tanner's kitchen table, a cup of coffee going cold beside the pile of papers I'd gathered, my will, my medical forms, the carbon copy of my signature, and that certified document from the county office. My name stared back at me, Evelyn May Carter, written in a hand too clean, too curved, too young. There it was, plain as daylight. Marcia had forged my name and notarized it herself. My daughter had turned my trust into a transaction. Mrs. Tanner peeked in from the hallway, wiping her hands on a towel. "You been sitting there all morning. You eat anything?" I shook my head. No appetite for food when you're swallowing betrayal. She sighed, poured herself a cup, and sat across from me. "So, what now?" "I'm going to the courthouse," I said, steady. "And I'm not going to beg. I'm going to remind them I'm still alive." The courthouse smelled like floor wax and forgotten promises. The clerk at the property division looked up from her screen, her polite smile barely hiding the weariness of bureaucracy. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" "I want to file a report for property fraud," I said, laying down my papers like a gambler playing her last hand. Her eyes flicked from page to page, then back to me. "This is your daughter's name as the notary?" "Yes." She whistled softly. "That's unusual." "Not from my life," I said dryly. She explained the process: statements, copies, affidavits, the slow crawl of justice wrapped in paperwork. It would take time I hadn't expected to spend fighting my own blood. When I left, I stood on the courthouse steps and let the wind cool my face. Across the street was a small law office, Brown and Associates. The name tugged at something in me. Brown. David Brown. My feet moved before my mind caught up. David was there, behind a desk stacked with blueprints and half-empty coffee mugs. He looked up when I entered, startled but not unkind. "Mrs. Carter," he said, standing. "I wasn't expecting." "I didn't come to haunt you," I said, managing a small smile, "though heaven knows I've been haunting myself." He gestured for me to sit. "What's this about?" I slid the papers across the desk. "My daughter forged my signature and notarized the sale. You bought stolen goods, Mr. Brown." He stared at the documents, his jaw tightening as he read. "You're certain?" "Certain enough to drag my cane all the way down here." He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. "I believe you." For the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest flicker of relief. "She told me you were fine with the sale," he murmured, "said you were too sick to handle it, that you wanted her to handle the finances." "She handled them all right," I said, "handled me right out of a home." David leaned back in his chair. "I've been through my own share of loss, Mrs. Carter. My wife passed 3 years ago, cancer. I sold our house because I couldn't stand the quiet, thought a fresh start would help." "I'm sorry," I said softly. He nodded. "Now it seems I've built my new start on someone else's grave." The silence between us was heavy, but not cruel. It was the kind of silence that holds two people standing on opposite sides of the same pain. Finally, he said, "I'll help you." I frowned. "Why would you risk that?" "Because it's the right thing to do, and because my conscience hasn't slept since that day you showed up on my porch." We spent the next week gathering evidence. David contacted his attorney. I met with a county investigator who seemed more surprised than sympathetic. "You'd be amazed how often this happens," he said. "Family's the easiest way to lose everything." I wasn't amazed. I was just tired. Each night, I'd sit by Mrs. Tanner's window and write in my notebook, not letters to Marcia, but notes to myself, reminders. You are still standing. You are still Evelyn. You are not what they stole. One evening, David stopped by with a file folder. Inside were copies of his bank transfers, communications with Marcia, and the sale documents. If this goes to court, he said, they'll need to see that I'm cooperating. It'll make your case stronger. I looked at him, this man who had no reason to help me. You know you could lose your house, right? He smiled faintly. It was never mine to begin with. That night I prayed for him, not the way I used to pray, not with verses or bargains, but with quiet gratitude, like whispering thank you into the dark. A few mornings later, I got a call from the investigator. Mrs. Carter, we've reviewed the documents. You have a solid case. The signature discrepancy and the conflict of interest with the notary, well, let's just say your daughter's in deep. I thanked him, hung up, and sat very still. Justice was finally waking up, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing at the edge of something I used to call love, realizing it was gone for good. When David dropped by that afternoon, I told him. He nodded. There'll be a hearing soon, right? Yes, I said. She'll have to face what she's done. He hesitated. And when she does? I thought of Marcia's little hands years ago, sticky with lemonade, clutching my fingers as we crossed the street. I don't know, I said quietly. Maybe I'll forgive her. Maybe I won't. But either way, she'll never have the power to take my peace again. David smiled, that small, tired smile of someone who's seen too much life. That's something, at least. That night, I sat under Mrs. Tanner's porch light, the air thick with summer crickets. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting my own story. The lemon scent drifted in from her neighbor's yard. I closed my eyes and imagined my tree still standing, still blooming, even if it wasn't mine to tend anymore. And that's when I realized sometimes justice isn't about getting back what was stolen. It's about remembering you were whole before anyone took a thing. The courthouse hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, bright and merciless, the kind of morning where the sun felt like judgment itself. I wore my best Sunday dress, navy blue with white cuffs, the same one I'd worn to Charles's funeral. It seemed fitting. After all, I was about to bury whatever was left of the daughter I once knew. David met me out front, holding a folder of documents. He looked calm, but the tightness around his jaw gave him away. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. I nodded. "Child, I've been ready since the day I walked into a house that used to know my name." Inside, the air was cold enough to stiffen bone. The clerk called our case, Carter versus Carter, property fraud allegation. Hearing my name repeated like that, twice, once for me, once for her, was a knife with two handles. Marcia sat at the opposite table, looking smaller than I remembered. She traded her bright dresses for a gray blazer, her jewelry for nervous fidgeting. When our eyes met, she looked down. The judge, a silver-haired woman with sharp glasses, shuffled the papers before her. "Mrs. Carter," she said, glancing at me, "you're the plaintiff." "Yes, ma'am," I replied. "And you allege that your daughter, the defendant, forged your signature and notarized the sale of your property without consent?" "Yes, ma'am." The judge turned to Marcia. "Miss Carter, how do you plead?" Marcia hesitated, voice barely above a whisper. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Her lawyer, young, polished, and clearly uncomfortable, stood. "Your Honor, my client acted under the belief that her mother wished to liquidate the property to cover medical expenses. Any irregularities in paperwork were unintentional." The judge arched an eyebrow. "Unintentional? Miss Carter is listed as both seller and notary on this document. She tapped the paper sharply. That's a serious conflict of interest. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just watched my daughter squirm beneath the weight of her own decisions. David was called as a witness next. He approached the stand, solemn, hat in hand like a man attending church. I purchased the property in good faith, he said. Miss Marcia Carter told me her mother was ill and had authorized the sale. I later learned that wasn't true. The judge nodded. And when you learned this? I contacted Mrs. Evelyn Carter and offered to cooperate fully. I want to make things right. Admirable, the judge said. Few people do. Marcia's lawyer cross-examined him half-heartedly, but it didn't matter. The truth was sitting right there in ink. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, leaning on my cane. The courtroom went quiet, not out of respect, but curiosity. People always expect old women to crumble, not to testify. Mrs. Carter, the judge said gently, you may speak. I took a deep breath. Your Honor, I've been a mother longer than some folks in this room been alive. I know what it's like to raise a child, to work 2 jobs, to pray over bills and broken hearts. I know what it's like to forgive more than you can count. But I don't know what it's like to sign away my home from a hospital bed, because I didn't. I pointed to the document on the judge's desk. That signature ain't mine. The woman who wrote that didn't have tremors in her hands. She didn't have 40 years of chalk dust under her fingernails. That's a young woman's pen, steady, smooth, practiced. My daughter's pen. A soft murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marcia's lawyer objected, but the judge silenced him with a glance. Your daughter was your notary? The judge asked. Yes, ma'am. The judge's lips pressed into a line. That alone is illegal. You cannot notarize your own transaction. Marcia's composure cracked. Mama, she whispered, I didn't mean to. Don't, I said quietly. Don't call me that here. Call me Mrs. Carter. That's who you sold. The judge cleared her throat. Miss Carter, this court finds sufficient evidence of fraud. You will be charged accordingly. The property sale is hereby declared void. Ownership reverts to the plaintiff, Mrs. Evelyn Carter. The gavel struck. One sharp sound, like the universe exhaling. But instead of triumph, I felt hollow. The courtroom blurred as tears threatened, but I held them back. Justice doesn't always feel like healing. Sometimes it's just the absence of pain. Outside, the sky had softened, clouds drifting apart like curtains after a storm. David walked beside me, silent until we reached the courthouse steps. You did it, he said. I shook my head. No, the law did it. I just showed up. Marcia came out moments later, her lawyer already gone. She stood a few feet away, eyes red, lips trembling. For a second, I saw her not as the woman who betrayed me, but as the little girl who once hid under my bed during thunderstorms. Mama, she said softly. I closed my eyes. The word hurt more than the betrayal. I don't know why I did it, she continued. I thought maybe I could start over. I wanted a different life. You wanted my life, I said. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I studied her, the desperate way she clutched her purse, the quiver in her chin. She was still my child, but not my daughter anymore. Sorry doesn't buy back what's gone, I said. Not the house, not the trust. Maybe one day you'll understand the difference between inheritance and integrity. She reached out, her hand trembling. I didn't take it. David stepped forward. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you home. Home. That word felt different now. Heavy. Sacred. As we walked away, I heard Marcia's voice behind me. Small, breaking. "Mama, please, don't hate me." I turned halfway. "I don't hate you, Marcia, but love doesn't mean standing in the fire just to prove you still feel warmth." Her sob followed me down the steps, echoing off the courthouse walls like a hymn that had lost its faith. Later that evening, I stood at the gate of my house again. The porch light was still broken. How poetic. David handed me the keys. "Paperwork's filed. It's yours again." I took the keys slowly, feeling their weight. "You could have kept it," I said. He smiled faintly. "Some houses belong to more than one story. This one's yours." The lemon tree rustled in the wind, branches brushing against the porch railing like a familiar hand. When I stepped inside, the house greeted me with silence, the kind that wasn't empty, just waiting. Dust floated in the sunlight, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry. Not out of sorrow, but relief, the kind that tastes like forgiveness you're still learning to give. I touched the wall beside the doorway, felt the cool plaster beneath my fingertips. "I'm home," I whispered. In the distance, church bells rang. Somewhere between one note and the next, I swear I heard Charles laugh. I moved back into the house the following week. The first morning I woke there, the air was cool and still. The walls smelled faintly of someone else's detergent and someone else's life, but underneath it, I could still smell us. Me and Charles, Sunday mornings and lemon polish, gospel music drifting through half-open windows. I stood in the kitchen, sunlight pooling on the floor where his chair used to sit. The place looked smaller, but maybe it was just me who had changed. You can't go through fire and expect your skin to fit the same. Mrs. Tanner came by that afternoon with a peach cobbler and a look that said more than words could. "It feels right seeing you here again," she said, setting the dish on the counter. "Like the house was holding its breath." "Maybe we both were," I said. We sat for a while, two old women filling the silence with little things. The price of milk, the weather, how the church choir sounded off-key without Pastor Riley's niece. Every so often, I'd glance at the door, half expecting Marcia to appear. She didn't. 3 days later, an envelope arrived. No return address, just my name written in that familiar neat script. Inside was a short letter and a cashier's check. "Mama, I know you won't want this money, but I can't keep it. I've started volunteering at the legal aid clinic. Maybe one day I'll do something good enough to make up for what I've done. Please be well. I'm sorry. Marcia." I folded the letter carefully, ran my thumb over her name. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, just an ache, quiet and clean, like the air after rain. I tore the check in half, dropped it into the wastebasket, but I kept the letter. Some things you throw away, others you keep because they remind you forgiveness isn't a moment, it's maintenance. David stopped by one evening, carrying a small box. "Found this when we cleared out the garage," he said. "Thought it belonged to you." Inside was Charles's old hammer, the handle worn smooth, initials carved in the wood, CEC. "Thank you," I said softly. He nodded toward the porch. "Mind if I fix that broken light before I go? Seems a shame to leave it dark." I smiled. "Help yourself. I've had enough darkness for one lifetime." As he worked, the scent of warm metal and lemon drifted through the air. When he flipped the switch, the bulb flickered to life, soft, golden, imperfect. The porch glowed again, and for a second, the years rolled backward. "Looks good on you," he said, meaning the light, meaning peace. "Don't go flattering me, Mr. Brown," I teased. "I'm too old for that." "Maybe," he said, "but not too old to start again." Later that night, I brewed a pot of tea and sat on the steps. The neighborhood was quiet, fireflies dancing like stubborn hope. Across the street, Mrs. Tanner's radio hummed an old hymn, "His eye is on the sparrow." I whispered along, voice thin but steady. For weeks, I thought justice meant getting the house back, but sitting there under that porch light, I realized justice had shown up long before the judge's gavel, in every step I took toward truth, every time I chose not to become bitter. The lemon tree rustled beside me. I reached out and touched one of its branches, feeling the rough bark against my skin. "You made it," I said. We both did. A month later, the county court finalized the charges. Marcia accepted a plea deal: community service, probation, restitution. The paper called it leniency due to family circumstances. I called it grace with supervision. She wrote again after that, shorter letters this time, updates, not apologies. I answered once, simply, "You keep doing the right thing, and one day I might let you hug me again." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the road there. On Sundays, I started baking again. David would stop by with his little boy, and we'd share stories on the porch. Sometimes I'd catch the boy staring at the lemon tree, eyes wide. "It smells nice," he'd say. "It's older than your daddy," I'd reply, "and twice as stubborn." He'd laugh, that high-pitched sound children make when they still believe the world's kind. I wanted to protect that laugh the way I couldn't protect my own daughter from her greed. Maybe this was my second chance, not to be a mother again, but to be someone's witness to goodness. One evening, I took out my old notebook, the one I'd filled with notes to myself. I added one last line. "Home is not the place you fight for. It's the place that keeps you soft enough to fight at all." Then I closed the book, set it beside Charles's hammer, and let the quiet fill the room. Outside, the porch light flickered once, then steadied, as if the house were breathing easier now. I smiled to myself. Maybe I was too. There's a certain quiet that only comes after a storm. Not silence exactly, but something cleaner, stripped of all pretending. That's what my house sounds like now. No echoes, no ghosts, just air and truth. Most mornings, I sit on the porch with my tea and watch the sunlight slide through the lemon leaves. That tree's older than my regrets. Its branches lean a little, but it still blossoms every spring, just stubborn enough to believe the world still needs beauty. I used to think forgiveness was something you gave away, like a gift wrapped up with a ribbon, but it's not. Forgiveness is the work you do in your own heart so you can breathe again. It doesn't excuse the hurt, it just stops the hurt from owning you. People ask if I ever took Marcia back. The answer's not simple. She calls sometimes, polite and careful, her voice soft like she's testing the air. We talk about safe things, the weather, Mrs. Tanner's health, that little boy who keeps breaking my porch swing when he visits. We don't talk about the house or the papers or the nights I spent praying her name would stop burning in my mouth. Some things are better left sleeping. And yet, every call ends the same way. "I love you, Mama." "I know, baby." It's not the same as forgiveness, but it's close enough to start planting seeds again. A few weeks ago, I found one of Charles's old notebooks tucked behind the fireplace. On the first page, he'd written, in that crooked teacher's hand of his, "The home is where mercy learns your name." I read that line over and over until the words blurred. Maybe he knew someday I'd need to hear it more than once. I've come to understand something I wish I'd known younger, that justice and peace aren't twins. Justice fixes the world, peace fixes you. And if you're lucky, they arrive at the same door. Mine did. Last night, I hosted supper for the first time since the trial. Mrs. Tanner brought her cobbler, David brought his boy, and I brought my old laugh out of hiding. We ate on the porch as the sun slipped down, painting everything in that honey-colored light that makes even cracked paint look holy. "Miss Evelyn," the boy said, his mouth full of pie, "is it true your tree's magic? Daddy says it never dies." I smiled. "Maybe it's magic. Maybe it's just loved enough to keep trying." He nodded solemnly, as if that made perfect sense. Kids understand truth better than grown-ups do. Later, after they left, I stayed outside. The night was thick with summer sounds: crickets, a faraway dog, the hum of streetlights. I looked at my house, the same way you look at an old friend after a long fight. "You and me," I whispered, "we made it back." The lemon tree shivered in the wind, and one yellow leaf fell, landing at my feet. I bent down, picked it up, and tucked it into my notebook like a pressed promise. If someone asked me what I learned from all this, I'd tell them the truth. You can lose everything and still not be broken. You can be betrayed and still choose gentleness. You can stand in the ashes of what was yours and still plant something new. I've learned that strength doesn't always sound like thunder. Sometimes it's the quiet voice that says, "Tomorrow, I'll try again." And if you've ever been where I was, staring at the ruins of your own trust, wondering how to start over, hear me when I say this. You don't rebuild by chasing what's gone. You rebuild by honoring what's left. Because home isn't the wood or the walls. It's the part of you that survives the loss and still dares to love. The porch light flickers softly as I finish my tea. The moon hangs above the lemon tree like an old friend who refuses to leave until you're safe. Would you have forgiven your own child if they sold your home? I still don't know the answer, but I know this. Kindness isn't weakness, it's inheritance. And that, my dear, is the story of how I lost my house and found myself again.